Today can be the turning point in your life by making a simple decision.
Fundamental questions of navigation. Where am I? Where am I going? And how do I get there from here?
I invite the leaders of our planet to ask themselves these three questions before they make any crucial decisions.
But if you don't make decisions, you're going to stay right where you are.
We are all map makers.
We are in a time of transition.
If we're going to change, we have to change the direction that we're going.
Our planet needs leaders who know where they want to go.
When we change the direction we're going, then we want to make sure we're going in the right direction.
Leaders who can see the big picture.
Because if we're not, we're going to either go backwards or we're going to stay where we are.
Recognizing the psychological and the spiritual shifts and changes that need to be made, often from the inside to the outside.
To be able to shape your future, you have to be willing and able to change your paradigm.
Complex journeys require navigation. The path to the truth is one such journey. This is your GPS. Hairstyling services provided by J.D. Edwards Salon and Spa, Palmdale Shopping Plaza, Ladera Street. Accessories provided by Chevette Williamson Jewelry. Standout jewelry for standout women. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to GPS, Global Paradigm Shift on Global 99.5 FM. I'm your host, Michelle Malcolm, and as always, it's a pleasure to be in your company today. Thank you so much for tuning in on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. Looking forward to a really good conversation today. I have a gentleman on today who I've been after for a couple of weeks. And I'm just very honored that I finally got him to come on. And, nothing before it's time, because what we're going to be talking about today is a very timely topic as for right now. So the timing couldn't have been any better. I'm talking about the one and only Maurice Glinton, who's going to be joining us on the show today. And we're going to be talking about the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the Hawksbill Creek Agreement and what needs to happen to bring Grand Bahama back to its glory days. It's going to be a very in-depth, interesting conversation. So I want to invite you to like and share the show if you are watching via Facebook. We are streaming live there on the official Global 99.5 FM and the official Michelle Malcolm pages. Also streaming live on YouTube on our official channels. And you can call in at 326-0271. 326-0271, 326-0272, 326-0272, the WhatsApp. Well, no WhatsApp line today, folks. No WhatsApp line today because our WhatsApp line is being used on Paradise Island by Shelley Lewis, who is going to be giving us a little bit of an update with regard to the official visit of U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, who is going to be meeting with Caribbean leaders to discuss the environment and climate change and other matters. I actually just came from Paradise Island. I had to rush here to make sure that I could be on air on time. But I left Shelley over there, and I guess whatever she can, she's going to give us an update. And I say whatever she can, because, boy, that's some tight security over there, even for the media. I mean, they ain't giving you no room to breathe over there. But I'm sure Shelley will be able to update us as it relates to that. So we're available on, you can catch us on Cable Bahamas Channel 974 and on your radio dial here in New Providence 99.5 FM. Special welcome to our Grand Bahama audience that's tuning in. And you can also reach us via WhatsApp, the Global 99.5 FM app. That you can download to your smartphone or smart device and check us out that way. So No WhatsApp calls or messages today because our WhatsApp phone is being used for that purpose of covering that event. And we're going to be, I understand, contacting Shelley in a few minutes to get a very brief update because I can tell you, having just come from Paradise Island, ain't much happening over there right now. And I'm sure she'll be able to bring us up to speed as to, you know, there's not much happening right now as far as a media standpoint is concerned. So let me bring my guest into the studio, Mr. Maurice Glinton KC. Is a very, very important man in this country. Why he's getting up his face when I say that? Welcome, Mr. Glinton. Let me give you a little bit of his background. He is a government high school outstanding student and record-holding athlete, attended University of Maine, Cambridge University, UK, and Lehigh University, USA, held Ivy League track and field records, maintains a practice between the Supreme Court and the Privy Council, specializing in constitutional and administrative law and complex matters in appeal. He is a very well-respected voice in the country, particularly as it relates to his knowledge with regard to the Hawksbill Creek Agreement and the Grand Bahama Port Authority. I'm trying to open the short bio that he sent to me. And I'm not sure it's going to open in time. So I'll try to get that open and then see if we can, I guess, give him a little bit of a little bit more proper introduction, maybe later in the show. But for the meantime, Mr. Glinton, how are you, sir? Now, you are muted. You need to unmute your microphone. I see where you're muted. Let me see if I can do it from my end. Okay, look for in the top right-hand corner, you see the little microphone icon. Just click onto that. And that should get you unmuted because I can't unmute you from my end. You see it? Look in the top right-hand corner of your, he's having a hard time finding the microphone to unmute. See if you can unmute him, Jason, from your camera. No. So, Mr. Glinton, you're gonna have to unmute yourself. You got to figure out how to do this real quick. Or if you look to the bottom left, you'll see an icon, a microphone icon with a red line going through it. It says unmute. You need to click on that so you can unmute yourself. Okay, he has somebody there helping him. Just need to unmute his microphone so we can hear what he has to say. All right. In the meantime, while they work on that, let's see if we can get Shelley Lewis on the phone to give us a short update with regard to what is happening on Paradise Island while Mr. Glinton figures out how to unmute his microphone. Yeah, let's let him figure that out. And let's see if we can get Shelley Lewis on the phone for a very brief update on what's happening on Paradise Island. So my producer's trying to get her on the phone. Mr. Glinton is still trying to figure out how to unmute his microphone. At the bottom of your screen, Mr. Glinton, you should see something that says unmute, stop cam, settings, present, invite, leave studio, all of that stuff at the bottom. And if you don't see that, again, on the top right hand of your screen, you should see well, that's where I'm saying it. I'm not sure if you'll see yours there. but there's something there. And again, I'm trying to unmute you from my end, but it says can't unmute guests because they chose to mute themselves. So I need you to figure out how to unmute your microphone. Okay? I'll be getting Shelley. A press conference. Okay. She will call us. Okay. When I left Paradise Island, they weren't sure if they were going to do a press conference or not, but they did say that whatever they did was going to start at 2:00. So clearly I couldn't stay there because I had to be here. So while we're waiting for Mr. Glinton to figure out how to unmute his mic, I'm going to go ahead and play one or two clips because the Grand Bahama Port Authority has been very much in the news as of late. Our Prime Minister has made it clear that more decisive action needs to be taken because in his view, the Grand Bahama Port Authority hasn't met its obligations as it relates to the Hawksbill Creek Agreement and the advancement of Grand Bahama. And so the Prime Minister made some statements in the House of Assembly that have gotten the attention of some of the folks at the Port Authority. So let's begin by playing the clip with regard to what Prime Minister Philip Davis had to say. And then let's see how quickly we can get Mr. Glinton sorted out.
Prime Minister Philip Davis voicing his concerns over the prolonged decline of the Grand Bahamian economy as he declares the current Hawksbill Creek economic model ineffective. With Grand Bahama's economy declining by 9%, Prime Minister Davis says something must change to put that island on the right track.
Evidence confirms the view of my government that the Hawksbill Creek Agreement economic model, which is meant to attract foreign direct investment, does not work. Furthermore, in our view, the governance model of the Grand Bahama Port Authority must change.
The Hawksbill Creek Agreement, signed on August 4th, 1955, has been instrumental in the development of Freeport. Freeport's existence and significant infrastructural and investment advancements can be attributed to this 99-year agreement between the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the government. The HCA includes obligations, duties, exemptions, and grants the GBPA approximately 230 square miles of land known as the Port Area for development. This agreement was extended several years ago by former Prime Minister Perry Christie. Meantime, Prime Minister Davis stressing that a change is needed now for Grand Bahama to prosper.
The government of the Bahamas has serious concerns regarding the Port Authority and its related companies with the terms and conditions of the Hawksbill Creek Act and its subsequent amendments. Previous administrations have made efforts to tackle the situation, but the issue is clearly systemic and fundamental. We believe, Madam Speaker, the time has come for decisive action. In due course, we will make a separate detailed announcement, and it may be during the course of the debate.
Okay, we have Mr. Glinton now. There we go. Mr. Glinton, can you hear us?
I can hear you well.
Praise the Lord, from whom all blessings flow. We got you now. We got you now. How are you today, sir?
I am fine. Thank you.
You're good. Okay. Welcome to GPS. No, you just turned off your camera now. Okay, leave it alone. Leave it alone. Don't touch anything. We got you on camera. We got your sound.
Touch me.
You're all set. Okay, so don't touch anything else. Let's just have this conversation. Welcome to GPS. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so Grand Bahama Port Authority, Hawksbill Creek Agreement, been getting a lot of attention as of late. Prime Minister Davis saying in the House of Assembly just recently that more decisive action needs to be taken because in his view, The Grand Bahama Authority has not met its obligations. But I thought that today we would need to go to a deeper level of conversation to truly understand what has been happening, or what is happening and what is not happening with the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. And I always say that in order to know where you're going, it helps if you know where you came from. And I know that you are well versed on where we came from as it relates to this whole Hawksbill Creek Agreement, how it started, what was the intent, etc. So let's start there, because I think people need to have that foundation before we can continue with the conversation about the way forward. I think people need to understand what exists now and how it came to be. So give us a bit of a brief history lesson for the young'uns out there who may not understand the dynamics between the Grand Bahama Port Authority, the government, and the Hawksbill Creek Agreement.
The young ones and the old ones.
Ain't that a shame?
Quite a shame. But let's begin at the beginning, because it is helpful.
Yeah.
To know the origin of this agreement, how it came into being, and the purpose it was supposed to serve.
Mm-hmm.
On the 4th of August, 1955, the government entered into an agreement with Wallace Groves, who was to incorporate a company by the name of Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited,
Mm-hmm.
which was understood at the time to be the sole engine for the development, not just of this area called the port area or even the island of Grand Bahama. It really was to serve as an engine for economic development for the entire Bahamas. One needs only look at the terms of reference of the commission, Royal Commission, that was appointed in 1970 and which gave its report on the 31st of March, 1971. And that's what, 40, how many years ago now? 52 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Not much is being done. And I have several views for that, to explain that. But continue on from 1955, when you had the first agreement. We call that the principal agreement, the 55 agreement. There were only 2 subsequent amendments. And part of the reason for that was the difficulty in getting the licensees who were given third-party status, because they were not parties to the agreement. But the 1955 agreement created this category of investors called licensees. And they were accorded the third-party status to the extent that they were conferred equally with the Port Authority with certain benefits and privileges to be exploited either in the form of undertakings or businesses here in this area. And the agreement was restricted the utility as well as the functioning of all of these privileges and these benefits, I call them facilities, to this area, which was geographically defined. And I might say here that in terms of its overall size, it's not much smaller than the whole island city, or I call the city nation of Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
And there was much promise. There were some challenges in the early beginnings, but it became necessary to amend it in 1960 for the first time. And it's an agreement dated the 1st of July of that year, and then later on in 1966. And these changes came about and could only have come about firstly with the consent of 100% of the licensees, whose written consent, in fact, had to be purchased.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them had become disenchanted. But if you go by the date of the agreement, you will see, those of you who are familiar with Bahamian constitutional history, 1955, the Bahamas was still a colony. 1955, it also meant that we hadn't yet gotten the first written constitution, which was only to be in 1963. But provision was made in the 1963 Constitution, essentially constitutionalizing this agreement because it was an international agreement. And the governor, for example, at that time under the 63 Constitution was required not to assent to any document that would appear to him to detract or to diminish the agreement impacted in any way, because it was an agreement which was binding upon the Crown. And that was because the agreement itself is a statutory agreement. It is unique in that respect. In other words, it's not just a simple agreement. I know you hear the parties talking about the port getting together with the government and amending it and all that. That shows a total lack of understanding of this agreement. This agreement is a statutory agreement which, if there are to be amendments, it must first have, now as a result of the Second Amendment in 1966, actually the First Amendment in 1960, 4/5 of the persons who are current licensees agreeing to it. And then there's supposed to be passed another enabling act. Now, I think where we are now in the course of things, the 1969 Constitution having overtaken that, and of course the 73 Constitution, the 50th year of which we're about to celebrate in a few weeks. I would submit that, in fact, to bring about any change here in Freeport regarding the Hawksbill Creek Agreement would require a referendum of sorts. It may require two of them. Firstly, the rights which licensees have and were accorded under the original agreement are not rights which, in fact, can be disregarded casually. In fact, it was observed that, in fact, in many ways, the licensees hold the key to everything. You can't move without them. You can't amend it. The agreement itself does provide for a review between the parties, called for either by the Port Authority or the government. The licensees can't call for it, but whatever changes that are agreed between the Port Authority and the government to make, it would require the written consent of at least 80% of the licensees to do. Now, here are some of the things about this agreement. You hear much talk about it and much jousting and stuff. I suspect there's something else going on here. And that it's not that the government or those persons in Nassau who speak about it glowingly and knowingly, when in fact it's obvious they have not a clue about what this agreement is about. This agreement essentially created a trust of certain rights, obligations that were associated and in fact ascribed to the Port Authority for the development of this area called the Port Area. In fact, the Port Area essentially was a scheme of development that was for the most part successful, except though the government was never vigilant enough in the only role that was left to it, which was, that is apart from being the government, so it would be responsible obviously for national security matters. But in terms of what was created, pretty much the government had to ensure that the agreement was doing what in fact it was supposed to be doing. But the government also had some things to do which it never did. In the entire life of this agreement, having regard to the fact that the government has always been essentially an understanding partner in this arrangement. I say that because of a side letter which was entered into between Wallace Groves and the government on the same day as the agreement came into force, which was the 4th of August, 1955, whereby the government obtained a first option of refusal at the sale of any of the growers' interest in this company. And by the way, the agreement itself provided that there could be, on the part of the Port Authority, no allotment of shares, more than 5% of those shares,
Okay.
except as between Mr. Grove and his wife, Mrs. Groves.
Mm-hmm.
So that the Port Authority was never free to just dispose of its shares to anyone it sees fit. Now, that is not the end of it. In fact, it goes deeper than that. Because among the things which the government had to, and at the time, the colonial government had to take into account, was that inasmuch as what was being given to the Port Authority with regard to, entrusted to the Port Authority, I like to use that word, entrusted to the Port Authority, with respect to the administration of this area, administration and development, certain things had to go with it. It therefore created monopolies. It created monopolies of utilities. And under the expression utilities, you have electricity, you have water and sewage and garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you would have telephony. These were things which are inherently and essentially governmental. These are not owned. So this illusion about, and in fact, the port acted on it with the government compliance as if they did not understand what they were doing. They went ahead and allowed, firstly in 1992, one of the first dastardly acts of the Ingram administration was to allow a company to come in here called Southern Electric,
Mm-hmm.
supposedly to acquire what was then Freeport Power, which was a nonsense. Freeport Power was a company that was only formed in 1963, and before that, it was nothing more than the electrical division of the Port Authority. But it was incorporated by that name, Freeport Power Company, and was really seen to be an emanation of the Grand Bahama Port Authority itself. Like there's so many other companies. It would have been a water company, water and sewage company. There was an airport company. I mean, for example, the other day, the government made quite a lot out of the fact that they were able to purchase back the airport for $1, an airport that they already owned and they didn't seem to know. But you can't, get them, some of them, to understand how the law of trust works. When, in fact, the government decided to entrust these responsibilities personally to the Port Authority, and I say personally because that's the way the agreement reads, the Port Authority knew and ought to have known what it meant because it was given that privilege, we call it a franchise, until 2054. But it didn't mean that the Port Authority could not, within that time, essentially just say, well, that is, the principals in the Port Authority could not say, well, we want to bring this to an end and we would just as soon move out if you will grant permission for, let's say, the Groves to get rid of or to allot their shares or sell them to someone else. So that I often try to explain to people that it was not up to Wallace Groves, who was the founder and the original developer, to simply say, well, I'm going to shut it down and I will leave it really as part of the inheritance for my children or somebody else. That was not up to him. Once he became persona non grata, he had to go. This was something which was part of the Crown's doing. The government could not walk away from its responsibilities overall, but the Port Authority had certain responsibilities with regard to this. And I would say, on balance, they tried to do it because there was much going on. And of course, there was an investment climate that was not always constant. So things had to be taken into account. And that was really one of the other reasons for having some changes to the agreement, so as to give the Port Authority greater latitudes, not more power, because the governmental power, which the government essentially entrusted to the Port Authority, was simply for that purpose. But in the agreement itself, it provides that somewhere along the way, what these responsibilities then were at the time, these rights and obligations, we call them,
Mhm.
for once the personal responsibilities of the Port Authority, were to be transferred to a statutory body or something called a local authority. And that could happen within 24. The agreement is not essentially bound by the 2054. Well, again, that's a common misunderstanding about how the agreement was to work. The Port Authority walk away with all the property that it itself owned, because under the original agreement, it was given permission to acquire land from some of the locals here who had land and was willing to sell it. The government itself owned some land and offered the Port Authority so many thousands of acres at what I call dirt prices. But that was really to endow this thing. That was the government contribution to what I call this trust that was created. But it did not mean that the Port Authority owned the Port Authority. The Port Authority, that is the Grand Bahama Port Authority, owned Freeport.
Okay.
This thing about them owning it, that is nonsense, because you want
yeah.
about it?
Yeah, I want you to pause for a second, because we do have Shelley Lewis on the line. We're trying to multitask here.
Sure.
As you may be aware, the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, is in town, and Shelley is just walking out of a press conference that was held there on Paradise Island. She's holding on the phone. So stick a pin in that thought, Mr. Glinton. Let me take Shelley's call, get an update on what's happening with Kamala Harris, and then we're going to come back to this conversation with regard to the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Shelley, what's happening over there on Paradise Island?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, Michelle, and good afternoon, Bahamas. Yes, Michelle, we just came from out of a photo op. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, she took a few minutes out to meet with Prime Minister Philip Davis and his cabinet. The group held a 2-minute photo op for the local and international media. The Vice President arrived here in the Bahamas earlier today for the U.S. Caribbean leaders meeting, and where they will be discussing issues including climate change, immigration, gun trafficking, human trafficking, among other topics. And Michelle has mentioned the U.S. Vice President is at this hour meeting with the Prime Minister and his cabinet. Later this afternoon, there are several other photo ops scheduled, and after which that meeting is expected to take place, during which time those top level discussions will take place. Michelle, Secretary is security is very strict over here and throughout the island. As expected, that is the United States Vice President, and the movement here at the Atlantis is very restricted as well. And there is a press briefing at 7 this evening at this time. A representative from the White House will address the media with regards to what is coming out of those talks. But in the meantime, like I mentioned, we are very restricted with our movement throughout the hotel and the area in which those meetings are taking place. But they are expected to brief us as to what is coming out of those talks, like I mentioned, around 7 o'clock. But in the meantime, Michelle, we're waiting for those meetings, for those photo ops, and whenever the information becomes available, we'll be more than happy to bring it to you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the update, Shelley. Wow, that's until 7 this evening. I know the media has been over there for quite some time. So, wow, let's see what comes out of that. I hope they allow you all to ask questions at that 7 o'clock briefing. Thank you so much for the update. All right. My guest today is Mr. Maurice Glinton. We're talking about the Grand Bahama Port Authority, the government, the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, that love triangle, or is it a hate triangle? What is the legality of all of this? Mr. Glinton has been doing an excellent job of bringing us the history of it. What is the legality of all of this? And is the Grand Bahama Port Authority set up so that it's a win-win situation for them, but not so much for the people of Grand Bahama or the Bahamas? And what role, if any, does the government play in facilitating that? We're going to talk about all that on the other side of the break, but we do have to take a break. So let's do that. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with KC Maurice Glinton after these words from our sponsors. Stay with us.
Global Paradigm Shift will return after this.
Understanding your microbiome, also known as your gut ecosystem, can change everything you thought you knew about nutrition, digestion, immunity, and metabolism. Keeping your gut ecosystem healthy and balanced is essential. Ultimate Microbiome by Longevity was specifically formulated to optimize this ecosystem. It provides the advanced support your gut needs through prebiotic, probiotic, and postbiotic supplementation. Our unique blend of probiotics includes Lactobacillus and Plantarum, healthy bacteria that can help prevent harmful bacteria from taking over your gut. Increasing your gut's population of beneficial bacteria creates a more balanced gut microbiome, which has been shown to aid in weight loss, skin health, sleep, mood, and may even help with seasonal allergies. Ultimate Microbiome also promotes the production of postbiotics. Postbiotics are key to help regulate your gastrointestinal health. To enhance digestion, Digizyme Multi-Enzyme Complex, a blend of 5 specific enzymes, has been added to Ultimate Microbiome. It can help break down food so your body can better absorb nutrients. Plus, we've added our proprietary I-26 Hyperimmune Egg Powder to aid in the elimination of disease-causing gut bacteria and help your body balance its immune response. Ultimate Microbiome, the scientific, proprietary, and holistic approach to gut health that helps optimize your body's entire gut ecosystem. To learn more, contact your Longevity associate.
Welcome to Sunshine Auto, the hardest place on the planet for rims, tints, and tires.
We are your auto superstore for rims, Lexani, Azaras, Trueform, Western, Lux, Fuel, Trackline, Tough, Rough Racing, Velocity, Mud, All-Terrain, and Low-Profile tires. Cars, homes, and commercial window tinting. At Sunshine Auto, we put God first and customer is king.
Blessed love.
To stay healthy, it's crucial to make sure you get the nutrition you need every day. But it's difficult to get all your recommended vitamins and minerals from food alone. Even in the United States, 94% of people are deficient in at least one nutrient. Beyond Tangy Tangerine 2.0 by Longevity is a simple, convenient, and affordable way to help your body get the essential nutrients it needs. It's an advanced plant-driven multivitamin mineral complex that contains certified organic whole foods, trace minerals, and antioxidants. BTT 2.0 supports your body's natural defense system with a proprietary blend of energy-boosting and body-loving nutrients, plus prebiotics, probiotics, amino acids, and enzymes that support digestion. With an unusually high ORAC score of 8,000, you get even more antioxidants to help combat free radicals that can cause damage to your cells. But to get the most benefit and value from any multivitamin, your body must be able to break down the nutrients so you can fully absorb them. Otherwise, they'll just pass through your system without doing any good. Beyond Tangy Tangerine 2.0 was specially formulated with synergizing cofactors to ensure you get maximum nutrient absorption. Beyond Tangy Tangerine 2.0 is the easiest way to give your body the balance and complete daily vitamin mineral supplement it needs for optimal support of your overall health. To learn more, contact your Longevity associate.
This portion of GPS is brought to you by Tiki Bikini Hut at Junkanoo Beach. Great food, cool tropical drinks, and family fun in the sun.
Welcome back to GPS, Global Paradigm Shift on Global 99.5 FM. Michelle Malcolm here in your company. And we're talking today with Maurice O. Glinton KC with regard to the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, the Grand Bahama Port Authority, the government, and that love or hate triangle, depending on who you ask. So how do you get to be a part of this conversation? Well, that's simple. The telephone numbers to call in are 3260271, 3260271, 3260272, 3260272. And no WhatsApp line today because that line is being used by Shelley Lewis for the Kamala Harris visit. We're streaming live on Facebook on the official Michelle Malcolm and Global 99.5 FM pages. If you haven't already done so, like and share the show. You can also check us out on YouTube on the official Michelle Malcolm and Global 99.5 FM YouTube channels. And we are streaming also on Cable Bahamas, channel 974. Check us out on radio on 99.5 FM here in New Providence. Also, you can check us out on the Global 99.5 FM app. And of course, welcome to all of our listeners all the way in Grand Bahama. You are being especially welcome today because today's show is all about Grand Bahama, the Port Authority, and the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, and why once what seemed to be the perfect mix by way of relationship and results has turned into what seems to be the perfect storm or nightmare. What was once a thriving, not facility, but, Freeport was once, I remember back in the day when Freeport was thriving. And now it's a mere shadow of its former self. And everybody's pointing the finger back and forth to say whose fault that is. The government is saying the Grand Bahama Port Authority is not doing enough. The Port Authority is responding and saying, well, our hands are tied behind our backs. And meanwhile, the people of Grand Bahama are suffering with all of this back and forth. So I think Mr. Maurice Glinton is, perhaps one of the best persons who can speak to us from a historical perspective and from a legal perspective as to what is really happening as relates to the responsibilities of all parties concerned and what really needs to happen to turn this thing around. Before we jump back in with you, Mr. Clinton, I want to play a clip. This is from way back in the day, which will sort of paint a picture as to the position that the Grand Bahama Port Authority has held over the years, and why I said prior to the break that they were operating in a win-win position. And I want to hear from you as to whether or not you think that this was all intentionally ignored from the powers that be over the past several administrations. Let's listen to this clip.
Edward was probably one of the most talented politicians this country's ever seen. Far, far better equipped and far, far superior to a lot of the people assembled here today. With no disrespect, Prime Minister. I remember when an election was called and I was in London and I phoned him and I said, so they've called an election? He said, yes. I said, who's going to win? And he said, we are. And I said, what do you mean? He said, relax, old cock. I've got both sides covered.
Now, in that clip, we saw two former prime ministers, one prime minister at the time, in the person of Hubert Alexander Ingram and Perry Christie, both laughing at the joke, but not a joke, that was told at that event. Don't worry, we got both sides covered. So it seems to me that the Grand Bahama Port Authority was set up in such a way that it could not lose. But the real losers, even though they didn't realize it, were the people of Grand Bahama. And by extension, the people of the Bahamas. It's like, I liken it to, let's say, the gaming houses or Vegas. No matter what, the house never loses. So somebody might hit them for, a couple of dollars here and there, but at the end of the day, the house never loses. The house always wins. And from what I can tell, the house in this scenario is the Grand Bahama Port Authority. They were set up so that they could not lose. What are your thoughts, Mr. Glinton?
Michelle, if I may call you that.
Please.
I was there on that occasion, and it was most embarrassing. The fact that you could get people to laugh with people who were laughing at them.
My God.
But this is a habit. This is something that we have mastered. We've mastered the art of grinning. We've mastered the art of even being convinced to purchase our own apples from people who don't own them. I'm going to say more about this because you've raised this issue about legality, and I wanted to assure you that what was done in 1955 was totally legal. Right? But like all things, to judge something legal, that is legal or unlegal, you have to have bounds.
Right.
Now, let me say this. The Port Authority did not always operate in this vein. In the old days, when people like Sir Stafford Sands, who in fact was the person who would have put this together, this whole scheme of development together, bear in mind who Sir Stafford was and who he was dealing with. Wallace Grove, they would have been inclined to be mutually respectful of each other. I have to say some things which are not entirely complimentary of ourselves. Mr. Groves understood that at the end of the day, he was dealing with the crown, not Prime Minister this or Prime Minister that, and not people given to giggling all the time, who could essentially be distracted, even away from safeguarding that which is precious to them. Let me read something to you so you will understand how it is back in 1970, under the terms of reference which was given to them. A distinguished royal commission that was appointed by the Governor General at the behest of then Prime Minister Pidling, well understood what this meant, this entire agreement, and this will put everything in place, and then I will elaborate on this point about legality. But let me first say this. You were to go to the Port Authority building and you ask them for a copy of the conveyance between the then Bahamas government, or the government of the colony of the Bahamas, and the Grand Bahama Port Authority, with regard to this area called the port area. They couldn't give you one because there's no conveyance. What was in fact executed was nothing more than agreement. And under that agreement, the government decided, and I'm going to use this as an example because these are some issues which are presently before the court and they will be determined either here initially and maybe finally somewhere else. It created monopolies of certain things because this must go with what we call governmental performance of the obligations which the Port Authority was vested with under the agreement of 1955. And some have gotten this so-called right, for example, to construct and operate utilities, namely electricity and water, to mean that somehow it was a gift from the central government to the Port Authority so that they had fee simple ownership of that. They own the airport that they could sell to someone else and just make off with the assets. Well, one of the reasons why the port, in fact, is struggling is that the assets of the trust have been bled. When I came here 40 years ago, it was clear to me that some things were happening in a way that if, in fact, this business was something regulated, let's say, on the New York Stock Exchange, some people would have been in jail.
Wow.
It's as simple as that. There was going on at that time a process of involuntary and when I say involuntary, not court authorized liquidation of the Port Authority and its assets. It was being bled. You had assets being hived off, that is, assets which belong to the trust. This trust, it belonged to the government. It was being personalized and put into companies that were owned by the principals in the Port Authority. It's clear breaches of trust. But the government didn't seem to understand this. They didn't seem to, you will find the signatures of some important people in government who had to prove whether there was, for example, central bank approval or some approval by some minister. Well, they were giving the okay to some of these atrocities. And so we find ourselves at a point where sooner or later, the cupboard started to become bare. And it was noticed, first of all, by those persons, in fact, who were raiding it. And you'll recall back in 2005, 2006, there was a great dispute which ended up being litigation that preoccupied the Supreme Court for quite a bit of time. And this litigation was between the families of the Haywoods and the St. George's estate, because St. George had died.
Right.
The St. George's had managed to have a receivership placed over the Grand Bahama Port Authority, ousting the Haywood clan. And for 2 years, that entity was being bled. And what was the fight? The fight was over supposedly the ownership and whether 50% was owned by the Haywoods and 50% was owned by the St. George's or whomever. And all the time, what was on record, what was on file, what the Port Authority had continued to record in the company's registry was that there was only extant some 92.5%, because in 1968, the government had acquired 7.5% of the port. Nobody likes to talk about it. This is part of the laughter. This is part of the joke that is being played on prime ministers, current, and past, who were then laughing. They knew what in fact had happened. They knew that if you went to the government of the company's registry now, you will find that the treasurer of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is still being shown as the holder, the owner of 7.5% of the shares. Now that speaks to a much larger issue, because even if that were not so, let us assume that there was the 100%, whomever owned all of it or a portion of it. Because it involved assets of the government, the crown, there ought, in fact, annually, or whatever period that could have been agreed between the government and the port, the presentation of financials laid on the table of Parliament, so that this country would have a better idea of its sovereign wealth. That's never been done. There's never been laid before Parliament any statement as to the wealth of this country, insofar as a major contributor to it, designed for that purpose, was the Grand Bahama Port Authority. You won't find it.
Is that intentional, though?
Well, it's intentional on the part of some people who are used to having their way and other people who are just used to just walking away with crumbs because they didn't know anything. And so they were forever needing to go abroad for other people to tell them what to do, and they didn't know whether the advice they were being given was good or bad. And so what is broken out now, it seems to me, is speaking to something else that's going on. It is not so much that the port has just now begun doing things which were foolish. No. From as early as 1982, I was part of an effort. In fact, I was counsel, along with another lawyer who would become the port's lawyer in time over the same, where one of the issues was this practice that arose to be determined, was this practice of the Port Authority sending license applications to Nassau for the government to approve who to give licenses to, when in fact it was clear from the agreement it had nothing to do with the government. These were rights, these were obligations on the behalf of the Port Authority that had to be borne by it. So we challenged it, and successfully. And as of the decision in a case called Shangri-La, the Port Authority have no excuse for pretending that it does not have the first and last say on licensing. That argument can be rested. And I started to tell you about the fight that went on between the Haywoods and the St. Georges.
Mm-hmm.
It eventually came to me after 2 years. It came to my view when Sir Jack's lawyers, Sir Jack Haywood, who were then out of Cayman, were advised to consult me with regard to his representation over the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
That is, the receivership that the Port Authority was put into at the behest of the estate of the St. Georges, who then took control. And I eventually agreed to do so, but under this condition, and Sir Jack was willing to go along with it, that recognizing that there might be a potential conflict of interest with my being a licensee of the Port Authority, that I had to get him to agree that if there ever was a conflict between his interest and the licensees, of which I am in the category, I would have to abandon him. He agreed to it. And what was the outcome of that litigation? Well, I eventually got a judge of the Supreme Court to agree with the legal proposition never before made that the Port Authority itself is a unique company. It cannot be put through the ordinary processes of receivership or winding up. That has been the law since the decision of the Supreme Court, since 2008, I think it was, or 2009. Never appealed, nor was the decision that we got in 1984 in the Shangri-La case ever appealed by the Port Authority or the government. And those were not the only decisions. It was also a major decision of then soon-to-be Dame Joan Sawyer, recognizing the statutory nature. In other words, this agreement that was practically cemented in the constitutional fabric of this country, so that it isn't for anybody in the Port Authority to be inviting government to sit down and see how we can amend it and make changes. That is all rubbish. It doesn't work that way. When the current trustees of those rights and obligations and responsibilities which were entrusted to the Port Authority, when it is felt by the current principals, they have exhausted their abilities and their talents with regard to what to do, you go away. The Port Authority will stay. Now, let me tell you why that must be so. When the Commission gave its report in 1971, and there's some things there which I could tell, had the government read it, they would have known what to do. They would have known what, in fact, they had to do in order to fulfill their role as the government, having now already created this thing called the Port Area and by means of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement Act and the agreement itself. They would have known. But here is what this outstanding commission, I say that because the chairman of this body was the late great Sir Hugh Wooding, after whom the UWI Law School, as well as another member of that was Sir Fred Phillips. These were both privy councillors from this region. I'll read a passage because I think it's informative. And the commissioner said this: because of the constitutional status of the Bahama Islands as a colony under the Crown, and because a legislation by an act especially authorized the government to enter into each of the three agreements. Remember, I told you about the agreement of 1955, and then there was an amendment in 1960 and one in 1966. Those were the only ones. It went on to say, any obligations undertaken by the government thereunder fell to be regarded as obligations binding on the Crown. In other words, what the government of the colony did then bound the Crown so that when they knew that the 1963 Constitution was about to come into existence, they had to provide for it. Because we were not yet an independent country.
Mm-hmm.
We were moving towards internal self-government, but we did not have responsibility for things like security, foreign exchange, none of those things. But we were in a process of moving from one stage of colonization into, some would say independence and some would say self-imposed colonization or recolonization, but that's another argument for another day. And then the commissioners went on to say this, but we have been informed by our counsel that subject to such restrictions and or conditions as may be imposed by the Constitution, they were now talking about the 1969 Constitution by the time the commissioners were given their remit.
Mm-hmm.
Because the 63 Constitution had given way to the 1969. It says, any such obligations can in law be abrogated or varied by subsequent legislation. In that regard, if any such legislation appeared to him acting in his discretion to involve a breach of faith, the governor, before assenting to it, was required by the pre-1969 Constitution, that is the 1963 Constitution, to reserve it for the signification of Her Majesty's pleasure. In other words, that was the limitation placed on Wallace Groves, on the Port Authority, so that by no stretch of the imagination could it then be argued or subsequently maintained that this area known as the port area became a territory owned by the families of the St. George's and the Haywoods. Not at all. They were the equivalent of what I call corporate trustees. For a price, operating a profit-making company, you get to make a reasonable profit, even though it's on the investment of other persons, but it could include yourself, and you might even also be a beneficiary of what in fact has been created. And that is what happened, because the Port Authority, if you look at the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, you will see that the Port Authority is in the same position as licensees. They have all of these benefits. The only difference is that it is to the Port Authority that the government entrusted these governmental powers and the rights really to perform certain obligations with regard to water and sewage and a number of other things. In 1968, of course, we had some changes with regard to immigration because that was the break situation. But throughout all of this period, you have a government and Nassau every now and again finding ways to take advantage of a lucrative situation, meaning no more than money to fight elections every 5 years. That's all it meant. Believe me, that's all it meant.
We get back to that.
We'll get back to that. But so you have this bleeding of the Port Authority. You have what I call the stripping of assets of the trust. Like, for example, suddenly persons within the Port Authority owning the power company, so that now, and I've seen the most recent annual statements of the Amera Corporation, they're claiming that they own Grand Bahama Power Company.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible. The Port Authority or whoever, whatever name they held the rights in, that is to build and construct it, never owned it. Nor did they ever own the airport. The only thing they were given were the rights to operate them.
Wow.
Never owned them. Now, these are which, you know, again, you will have no doubt some dispute, and there might be some common law lawyers, about saying that, well, Parliament can make any law and one Parliament can't bind another. But of course, in the case that I mentioned that Dame Joan Sawyer was associated with, she put that nonsense to rest when a lawyer dared to make the argument that one Parliament could not bind another. In other words, what the colonial legislature did then could now be uprooted by this current Parliament as it saw fit. And, she laid waste to that argument, and rightly so. Sheer nonsense. The agreement is encrusted and embedded in the Constitution. And I would say that before the 1973 Constitution, it may very well have been the argument that it would have been sufficient to secure the 80% written consents of the licensees, or 80% of the written consent of 80% of the licensees, and an enabling legislation to make some changes to it after there being a review called for by the Port Authority or the government to see what, because every agreement you need to visit it, every situation, to see where you, in light of, changes coming about, you need to make changes and adjustments. So one of the great features of this agreement that no one seemed to have taken advantage of, even though some of us in Freeport still can remember to go to some banks to remind them that, listen, you can't charge me on drafts because this is supposed to be tax-free. So that if I went to purchase a foreign currency draft, I would not have to pay the stamp tax on it. Now, under the agreement at that time, it seems to me that every major bank ought to have been headquartered here in this Freeport. The provisions are there for it. They would have been able to do their business and operate without having to pay stamp duty. One of the greatest atrocities that's being done here in Freeport is every year, persons like myself who own a bonded vehicle, we ended up paying taxes, road traffic taxes in the form of licensing duties, and the money remitted to the central fund, even though we're driving on our own roads. And we're told that we can't take our bonded cars outside of the port area, which is a bonded area. Nobody questions it. Nobody says, but this is inconsistent with the agreement. That's because they don't seem to know, or they don't want to know. So the Port Authority, or the principals, are taking advantage of something else. This laziness, this intellectual laziness that we suffer from. That is, as a people, where just by virtue of their sense of superiority, they can have, for example, Sir Jack making fun in the face of the prime ministers.
And both laughing.
And they were grinning.
Big
They didn't
joke.
understand that they were being insulted.
My God. We have to take a break. Is that a caller? Okay, we have to take a break. It's interesting that, and I'm letting you go and letting you talk, without much interruption, because we're getting a good history lesson here. That I think, we need to let be told. We see where now this generation of Haywards is saying, we'd be willing to sell, if we find the right partner. But, saying to the government, let's work together. Let's not fight over this. I'm paraphrasing here and being quite naughty at the same time. Can't we all just get along? So we're going to take a break. And on the other side of the break, we're going to look at what this generation of Haywards is saying. And I want to get Mr. Glinton's learned opinion as to how much... trying to be very diplomatic in what I say, how much weight we should put into that position. So stay with us. We're going to be back after this commercial break with more with Mr. Maurice O. Glinton KC on the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, the Grand Bahama Port Authority, the government of the Bahamas, and this love-hate triangle that seems to be keeping the people of Grand Bahama in this vice grip. What do we do to break free? We'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Global Paradigm Shift will return after this.
Your body's immune system is under constant pressure from things like stress, lack of exercise, and toxins in the environment. It's crucial to be proactive and support your immune system with the nutrients it needs to function effectively. But it's often hard to get these nutrients from food alone. Introducing fast-acting Zinc Plus Immune Support by Longevity. Unlike zinc-only supplements, Zinc Plus Immune Support builds on the proven power of zinc and adds complementary nutrients to give your immune system extra support. Vitamin D helps balance the effects of zinc, while our proprietary blend of natural fruit and root extracts provides the extra help your immune system needs to work against daily stressors. And we've included Longevity's exclusive plant-derived minerals to give your body the minerals it needs, but can't get from food alone. And because Zinc Plus Immune Support is delivered in a great-tasting, sugar-free, berry-flavored lozenge, it encourages quicker absorption of all these nutrients into your body. Zinc Plus Immune Support. Zinc plus the extra support your body needs to promote a healthy immune system. To learn more, contact your Longevity associate.
Welcome to Sunshine Auto, the hardest place on the planet for rims, tints, and tires.
We are your auto superstore for rims, Lexani, Azaras, Trueform, Western, Lux, Fuel, Tracklight, Tough, Rough Racing, Velocity, Mud, All-Terrain, and Low-Profile Tires. Cars, homes, and commercial window tinting. At Sunshine Auto, we put God first and customer is king.
Blessed love.
It's gotten harder and harder to get your daily requirement of vital nutrients from food alone. Without additional vitamin and nutrient support, your health and well-being can suffer drastically. That's why Z-Radical was specifically formulated. It combines a blend of antioxidant-rich vitamins, minerals, and botanicals with the protective powers of fucoidan to help fill the gaps from lack of nutrients in your foods. The core of Z-Radical is fucoidan, a naturally occurring polysaccharide that helps stimulate immune reaction, protecting you against inflammation and oxidative stress. We harvest this powerful mineral-rich nutrient from brown seaweed, harvested only from the world's most pristine ocean waters to ensure the purest quality. It's then extracted using cold process technology to ensure maximum levels of bioavailability. Then we add essential vitamins that help to protect your cardiovascular and nervous systems and are crucial for optimal immune and neurological function. Z-Radical also includes a proprietary blend of delicious antioxidant-rich fruits and berries. This great-tasting combination helps your body combat free radical imbalances that can contribute to a variety of degenerative conditions like arthritis and heart disease. Z-Radical. Experience the power of fucoidan with antioxidant-rich berries, 8 essential vitamins, and more to provide you with potent health benefits. To learn more, contact your Longevity associate.
And we are back. Welcome back to GPS, Global Paradigm Shift on Global 99.5 FM. Michelle Malcolm in your company. My guest today is KC Maurice Glinton. We're talking about Grand Bahama, the Grand Bahama Port Authority, the government of the Bahamas, the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, and this triangle that seems to be, everybody pointing fingers as to who is responsible for what and who ain't doing what. And meanwhile, the economy of Grand Bahama seems to be going to hell in a handbasket. The people suffering, and everybody's wondering what in the world is going on. If you'd like to be a part of the conversation, you can call in at 3260271, 3260271, 3260272, 3260272. And you can also check us out on Cable Bahamas, channel 974. And we are streaming live on Facebook on the official Michelle Malcolm and Global 99.5 FM pages. If you haven't already done so, please like and share the show. Let everybody know that they can get a good history lesson and more by watching this show today. You can also check us out on the Global 99.5 FM app, and you can also listen by radio, 99.5 FM here in New Providence. And a huge welcome to our Grand Bahama audience. As I would have said, our guest today is KC Maurice Glinton. Been after this man for a couple of weeks, and I'm just so honored that he was able to finally join us. Nothing happens before its time, because the timing is perfect with all of this attention now that the Grand Bahama Port Authority is receiving after the comments of Prime Minister Davis in the House of Assembly saying the GBPA has not met its obligations and more decisive action needs to be taken in order to move Grand Bahama forward. Well, the grandson of the original Hayward, who was a part of this agreement, is now saying that, yes, I agree, more decisive action needs to be taken, but in many ways our hands are tied, and instead of fighting, let's work together to make this thing more effective. Let's go ahead and listen to this clip with regard to what Mr. Hayward had to say.
Rupert Hayward, grandson of former Grand Bahama Port Authority co-chair Jack Hayward, calls for immediate action on the Hawksbill Creek Agreement to revive Grand Bahama's economy. His remarks come after Prime Minister Philip Davis declared that the agreement is ineffective and announced forthcoming decisive action.
We've been saying to the Prime Minister and previous governments that the Hawksbill Creek Agreement needs to be certainly updated and certainly needs to have its embedded benefits maintained within that agreement, which have been diluted, over time. And for Freeport to succeed, we desperately need to have a modern, current 21st century Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which allows the port area of Freeport, Grand Bahama, to compete with the rest of the world. Decisive action, yes. Let's update the Hawksbill Agreement. Let's make it current. Let's make it relevant for the 21st century. Let's make it so that we can compete against the other free trade zones around the world, compete with Panama, compete with Dubai, compete with Singapore, and compete with Enterprise City in Cayman as well. But let's also spend our time mending the relationship between the Port Authority and the government.
Hayward also spoke to a plan developed by stakeholders in the Port Authority, which was presented to the government, regarding the way forward.
So I think we have identified some world-class partners who have all the requisite skill sets and reputation and experience in taking the island forward. And, I'm convinced, I think any objective person would be convinced that they really are exceptional and understand sustainable development, understand, large-scale urban revitalization, have a track record of doing that, have lots of experience in the region and in Africa and in the US. And I think, part of the solution for Freeport is creating a shareholder base, which government should be involved in, and the people of the Bahamas should be involved in.
That said, he says the Hayward family is willing to sell a portion of its stake to do just that.
The GBPA, the Freeport is much bigger than two families, much bigger than the Haywards and the St. Georges. And, we need to put plans in place and create, shareholder bases that are in the best interest of the people of Grand Bahama. And the Haywards, think that's in the interests of the wider stakeholders, and we'll be prepared to do that. But it has to be with the right partners.
The Hawksbill Creek Agreement, signed in 1955, established one of the world's two free trade zones at the time and played a significant role in attracting foreign direct investment to Grand Bahama. Fast forward to now, and things have changed. However, Prime Minister Philip Davis last week raised concerns about the Grand Bahama Port Authority and its related companies not complying with the terms and conditions of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement.
We have to also be cognizant that the Port Authority has been operating with one hand tied behind its back. We have certain enshrined rights within the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which have been eroded over time. And, if you look at the core functions of the Port Authority, one is to give out business licenses. Well, business licenses now for foreign investors, for foreign direct investment, which we know is critical to the growth of Grand Bahama, are really controlled in Nassau. You know, every business license is annotated by the Bahamas Investment Authority in Nassau. All exchange control, which every foreign direct investor needs, is again controlled first by the BIA and then by the Central Bank of the Bahamas.
He also spoke to the Port Authority's ability to maintain the city.
And this is well documented. The Port Authority has asked the government to update the bylaws that exist, and they were, I think, last updated in the 1960s. Now, that's a long time ago. If the documents that allow us to knock down buildings are not current, have not been updated so that we can actually deal with the blights and the hazards in the port area in an expeditious way, we can't do that ourselves. We've drafted the bylaws, we've sent them to government, I mean, over decades now, and they have not been updated.
Now, government has committed to improving the relationship with the Port Authority, particularly in this upcoming budget cycle.
All right, Mr. Glinton, you heard him. What are your thoughts on what Mr. Hayward had to say? I see you smiling there and shaking your head. So that'll give us a bit of an idea just what you think of that. What are your thoughts?
There was a time when the words spoken by young Hayward would have been found so offensive that he would have been called under the carpet, summoned to Nassau, and told when next he would be leaving.
My God.
You see, but he knows that the atmosphere in which he's dealing, which he survives, is favorable to him.
Explain.
The Prime Minister, for example, ought not to be in Parliament making this an issue as to the Port Authority not living up to its obligations. What are those obligations? And what are the obligations of government in relation to the Hawksbill Creek Agreement? One of the interesting devices that the Port Authority seized upon was to make itself a so-called regulator. So it sells off assets that are trust assets, which, by the way, it will have to be clawed back. Anybody coming in here and looking at the carcass of what's left, they're going to have to bring a number of actions to claw back assets which were taken from the Port Authority, put into private companies like PGL, Port Group Limited. These are private companies owned by the Haywards and Slingham. That is not in the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. They have essentially been decapitalizing the Port Authority, so it does not have the ability. Of course, it doesn't seem to have the, let me put it now, the wherewithal to continue to improve this place. It's lack of talent. I mean, let me be very brilliant. Lack of talent, lack of capital, but we know where the capital is. You go outside, you see that the roads are all falling apart. Millions upon millions of dollars have been collected over these centuries, these decades, in maintenance fees, all kinds of taxes, and we never see where they're going. Because they ought, in fact, to be here. The government ought, in fact, to have made it quite plain to the Port Authority that your right, or I should say rights, under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement with regard to these things that the agreement entrusted to you from 1955 depend very much upon your being able to show the steady development of this place. Whether that meant, replacing you with people, if you become persona non grata or not, this had to remain. So here you have now this jostling going on and this great pretense, when in fact the government, I suspect, has probably been in discussions with somebody else and has convinced them that if in fact sufficient pressure can be brought to bear, and meanwhile the Haywards are thinking that, well, this is also an excellent opportunity for me to get my last bit of blood out of these people before we leave.
My God.
We're going to admit that we are willing to sell. Listen to this. It is really the government that decided to enter an agreement with the Port Authority. And now they're saying that, well, we're willing to sell to some people who we approve and who regard as good partners. Mind you, that has never been the test. In the letter of the 4th of August, 1955, which was executed simultaneously with the promulgation of the agreement, part of the agreement of that contained in that letter with regard to the government having first option, of course, first refusal, was this: that even if the government refused to purchase the interests of the grows in the Port Authority, if he wanted to leave, he wanted to sell, even if that was so, the government still retained the right to declare anybody else that he might choose, any one other potential purchaser, persona non grata, so that no one can purchase unless the government says yes. Now, here, he seemed to be saying that, well, we will agree to sell, but first of all, we're not going to sell if it means giving the government the majority shareholding, and then it has to be somebody that we approve and all. Listen, that is heresy. It is an insult. And it tells me that the persons who sit in Parliament do not understand what their responsibilities are. No prime minister of this country, and I'll tell you this much, I always make these comparisons. Lee Kuan Yew from Singapore, he's no longer in place. His son, I think, is probably now been in place and out of place. But I was fortunate enough to meet him many years ago, the old man. And even in modern day times in this region, I would suggest that Prime Minister Motley would not tolerate being spoken to this way. You do not dictate to a sovereign government the way young Haywood is doing. And with whose blessing? Where did the liberty come from? The liberty came from practicing this craft repeatedly over the last 50 years, so as to make the 10th of July, 2023, the 50th anniversary, almost a joke. You're not asserting your duties with regard to safeguarding the interests of this place. And now you have persons who are only here by virtue of governmental permission, saying that, well, we're not going to do this or we're willing to do this. No, that's all wrong. And I suppose now we're probably much too weakened as a central government to do anything about it.
Let me ask you this question. This is all just so sad to hear. I liken this whole scenario, particularly as you've broken it down for us, to someone who gets a can of soda and sucks out all of the soda out of the can. And then once they can't get anything more of it, they crush up the can, throw it to the side and say, well, there's no more use for this can, so we're going to just throw it to the side. Would you say that that is what we see happening here? Is this Grand Bahama vision nothing more than a grand deception when it comes to the way that this has been allowed to operate?
No, I don't want to give the impression that the agreement, the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, is defective,
right?
Or that in fact it doesn't have a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I am one of the few who would insist upon performance of the agreement as envisioned from the very beginning.
Okay.
The agreement, however, has been turned into an instrument of oppression and fraud.
Mm.
And to hear them talking about the agreement in this way without any regard to the licensees tells me that nobody has been paying attention. Here is a fact. In the 50s and 60s, when licensees were contracting with the Port Authority so as to be what I call joint adventurous with the port in the development process,
mm-hmm.
you could get a license issued to you for $50, $100, or the equivalent in pounds. Nowadays, the Port Authority has found a way, and that's when your licensees were really coming from abroad. They didn't look like you and me. Now, for the average Bahamian to get a license to do business in the port, that's become now a profit center for the Port Authority, because now it's going to take you thousands of dollars. You'll never find it worthwhile to pay for a license and to operate a business profitably.
We have a caller on the line. Caller, welcome to GPS.
Good day and God bless. Good afternoon, Michelle. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I'm blessed. Thank God for life. Good afternoon to the Bahamas and good afternoon to Mr. Glinton. How are you doing, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Indeed. I have a number of questions I should like to ask you for clarity about the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, because those of us in Nassau, well, let me speak for myself. Me being in Nassau, I only have a vague appreciation for what that Hawksbill Creek Agreement is, means to Grand Bahama and to the entire country by extension. My first question to you, sir, is what is the basic purpose, not the legal purpose, not the basic purpose of and for the Hawksbill Creek Agreement? That's question number one.
JD, what time did you tune in?
I asked Michelle, my phone was literally dead. I just got it fixed 5 minutes ago.
Okay, because he
So I
covered,
wasn't able to even
he's
get in
pretty
here.
much covered that.
My apologies. I just tuned in to the station about 15 minutes
He
ago.
went into great detail.
Okay.
What is your next question? I suggest you listen to the show a little
Sure.
later
Okay,
on.
let me ask the questions and I'll hang up and listen.
Okay.
Where did you just said so that you don't want to give the impression that the agreement is defective. So where did whatever went wrong for the Port Authority to be, or that area now to be, quote unquote, gutted, no longer being what it was supposed to have been? Where has the government of the Bahamas gone wrong in not properly policing the Hawksbill Creek Agreement? And what now can we meaningfully and substantively do, not band-aid, but meaningfully and substantively do as a country to revive that or to get rid of it?
Yeah.
I'll hang up, sir, and listen. Michelle, thanks.
All right, thanks for calling. It seems as if Mr. Clinton's camera is freezing a bit. I think he may be having some issues with
Somewhere along the way, it would have occurred to principals of the Port Authority. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes. Go ahead, Mr. Clinton. We can hear you. Okay, you know
You
what?
can hear
It
me.
seems-
Yeah,
Yes,
somewhere
we
along
can.
the way, the Port Authority.
Go ahead.
Can I continue?
Yes, please.
Somewhere along the way, early on, it was discovered that the genius that was associated with Wallace Groves disappeared with him.
Oh, wow.
And rather than there being what I call sowing so that we can all continue to have a harvest, we began reaping. And in order to do that, it meant that the principals in the Port Authority had to take into account the fact that there was a political plane, a political hand of politics that could be played. And they played it so that it was easier for Sir Jack to say that, we win no matter who wins the government of the day. We're sitting pretty. That's how it became possible to do. Because it shifted from developmental to really just more than political games. And of course, you would find that there were many, many people who quite understood that and liked it, because many of them could go to the principals and say, well, listen, I need a lot of land here or something here, or I need this, and they would get it. The focus was off development. The focus was no longer the concern of the principals of the port that they put on their fiduciary duties and their fiduciary obligations, or even the ability to make money, because money was coming in, but it was being bled. And then the idea came that, well, if we could somehow acquire ownership of some of these so-called productive assets, whether it's water, sewage, electricity, sell them off, and I'm talking for millions of dollars, and the assets split between the families. There was nothing here. That money ought, in fact, to have been part of the estate of the trust, of obligations that became governmental, a source of revenue. Nobody is given account for it. And throughout the years of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, now it may be that somewhere along the line, the Treasurer of the Bahamas was being given copies of the financial statements as to the economic progress of the Port Authority, but I don't know that. These important things ought, in fact, to have been laid on Parliament's table so that we have an idea, even of the value of the government's 7.5%. What happened to the dividends? I know for a fact that the last persons who served on the board of the Port Authority were those persons who resigned, I think somewhere in June, I think it's somewhere around, no, actually it's probably nearer July 2006. And they resigned over the dismissal of a Bahamian who in fact was the general counsel of the port for more than 20 years. And they walked away. And so nobody knows. You've got people who are making decisions with regard to the well-being of citizens of this country who themselves don't have to vote, who are not accountable to us. And the government has allowed it.
Are we talking here about selling our birthright for a bowl of porridge yet again?
Yet again, yet again, but innocently. Innocently. It's an easy path to go down, the one that's greased.
Oh my goodness.
No. What the Jack was saying pretty much is this. We understand that every 5 years there's this mock fight between the two major political parties. Sometimes you have some other independent parties.
Mm-hmm.
You got to keep them happy. You only want T-shirts and all that stuff. Meanwhile, the bulk of the money is leaving the place because you've got, people with fancy taste and expenses which have to be met. And there was also the illusion, and I've heard it out of the mouth of one of the Haywoods, that they own this island down in the Caribbean. I have never known anybody to say that, the port of the Freeport was owned by the Haywoods or the St. George's or between them. I don't know how that could have been possible in law. But it is a myth that has taken hold. And young Haywood is now saying that we are in the driver's seat and we will play, little games, and sooner or later we'll arrive at an amicable settlement, and you will forget that we have managed to take assets, put them in companies which we own, gone away and have spent millions and millions unaccountably. And you could have the carcass.
My God. The grand deception, I call it. We have a call on the line. Caller, welcome to GPS.
Good afternoon, Lady Malcolm. How are you doing?
Excellent. How are you?
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Mr. Glendon.
Go ahead. He's listening.
Okay. Mr. Glendon, question for you, sir. You're a Bahamian, right? Pardon me?
What do you think, if it matters?
No, it's just a question, because a man of your caliber and your status, right? Over the years, I've followed you with your knowledge and your experience Why haven't successive governments, or have they approached you to assist us with the development of this nation? That's why I ask you that question. If you're
no, you're saddling me with a burden. I am not the only person that has found that that there's no use for us. There have been people like that over the years who, and that is nothing that I'm concerned over.
All right, caller, you have another question because I have a cell phone caller holding on.
Yes, I have another question.
Go ahead and ask it.
I hear from a family of politicians. I don't have to say which family, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they said to me, despite what all Mr. Glinton and everybody else, y'all and them was saying about the Port Authority, that what is the real gloves of true reason why the Port Authority took over Freeport? What's the real down true reason why they did? I'll hang up and listen to the first part.
Thanks.
I didn't quite understand. Maybe Michelle, you can rephrase it for me so that I understand the point that he wants me to address.
What is the real reason why the Port Authority was given, I guess, this authority over Grand Bahama?
No, they took it, and they're taking it. It's not that they were given it. If you've got people who are not intellectually curious, if you've got people who want to just be prime ministers without riders and don't have, you can't find a reason to go and hire, let's say, a retired prime minister from Great Britain like Tony Blair, because we like looking outside, for answers. I always say, we like somehow hiding our nakedness with other people's clothes. The truth of the matter is, there is nobody in the Port Authority with the ability. You're not talking about a little village. I mean, this place is crumbled, yes. But those of us who were coming here from the 60s for the first time, even though that was a period when the rot began to set in, you will see the difference between then and now. The last bit of major construction to take place was probably in the late 60s and maybe just a bit with the construction of what is now the Port Lucaya area, and there's an area down in the city. And that was really at the engineering of a Canadian gentleman who had his own reasons for prompting the port to become involved. But if you look at what has happened to the airport went under, not really for the second time in 2019. They have not been able to really to get the airport going again. How do you expect? I mean, I can remember when I came here for the first time in the 60s, that it was possible for me to come from Nassau, come to visit my friends in Grand Bahama. And when it was time for me to go to school up in New England, up in Maine, I could catch what was then, it's called Northeast Airlines, and go all the way up from here. You had Braniff, you had, and these were wide bodies.
Mm-hmm.
All aircraft at an airport, not as developers this. And then one day you wake up and you see where a government was induced to buying or pretending that they were buying a hotel up here that nobody else wanted. And the reason they gave was that we were going to buy it and keep it because then we will have somebody to come and buy it from us. And I'm saying to myself, why don't you let the marketplace do its work? The government supposedly bought the Alukaya Hotel and they had no right to do so. But nobody is going to go to the Minister of Finance and say to him, you pay this money back because you had no authority to take it out of the consolidated fund. Who's going to sue him? When you go and you engage in this exercise of pretending that you are now buying an airport that you already own, and you could not, in fact, have alienated to begin with. These are aspects of the sovereignty of a country, independent or colony, that it is not within the gift of any administration of the day to simply give a bill of sale to somebody for having bought it from them. And as I indicated before, there can be no changes to this Hawksbill Creek Agreement, lawfully, that is.
Without a referendum.
Without a referendum, without, first of all, the agreement of at least 80% of the licensees.
Smoke and mirrors. We have a cell phone caller that's been holding for quite a while. Caller, welcome to the show.
Yes. Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to your guest.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. I called in from Freeport.
Okay.
I want to say that all my life I was here. And I never really understand, like, why the port was here, but I understand what they was doing. So I could appreciate the gentleman and what he's saying, because I really learning about it. And I really heard, because even, like I say, after the hurricane and stuff like that, when I went to them, if you know how I get treated and how...
Okay, caller, I don't know what you just did, but all of a sudden we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. No, I said after the hurricane, I went through a lot with them. It's just too long to get into details, but most of the stuff what he's saying is true. My only thing is, like, people like him who have a lot of knowledge about what's going on, it's less we Grand Bahamians really don't know. We only know what we're being taught, like misinformation, like, okay, the port owned this. Because all my life, I was taught that 8 Mile Rock is 8 Mile Rock. You can't drive your bonding car down that area. You got to park it here. You know what I mean? It takes this long for somebody to really say the truth. So I think people like him need to expose basically what's going on so we can move on, because it's really bad. You have, and Freeport is only 2 lines. If he's from Freeport, he knows exactly what I mean, and it's either you doing all right or you ain't. And I on that ain't part. So I listen and the sit back, it make me really feel bad to know that, okay, even when I hear the grandson speaking, it kind of should irk me, because he's not black, he's not from here. They know what they doing, and he's still trying to get away with it. They still trying to rob you. What it is you can take from me if I don't have nothing. I lost my home, lost my family and everything. He knows the condition of Freeport, right? And I just saying, people like him would have this nice knowledge, and people like me who've been around forever, believe in a lie. They need to expose, even if it's on the side of the government. And if they need to go, then go. Or if we need to be represented by somebody different, then let that happen.
Okay.
Because we cannot just keep talking and talking. We just talking through. It's been 100 years they've been here.
But caller, I'm going to let him respond because we're running out of time. But and when you're talking about if we have to be represented by somebody else, you have the power to decide who you want to be represented by.
Yeah, I know, but I saying this, I can leave when I just saying it was a lie that was told from us, even to my mother and my father them believe what I believe, because I got that from him, from them. Right. I'm saying he's so knowledgeable of what's going on. I know might be a few of them, right? But I think they need to come out to just expose exactly. To me, he exposed, and this is the first time I hear this. Like, that just blowing my mind what he's saying. You know? And I believe people like him who have power, knowledge, and understanding of exactly what this Hawksbill Creek Agreement is, or whatever the case may be, if it ain't benefiting his people, I think you know what I mean, and he need to come out of the shop, because I don't know him. Right. He might be popular in certain bubble, but I feel this gentleman need to come out and be a Freeport poor people defender. Okay. That's my feelings towards it. I'll just sit back and let him talk.
Yeah, let's let him respond, because we're running out of time. Mr. Glinton, how do you respond to that caller?
Very, very simply. I don't want him to continue to beat himself, because he's not the fault. The truth of the matter is, it should be not the responsibility of the average citizen to be knowledgeable about the Port Authority and the detail that I have become, because I wasn't born with the knowledge. It took me to pursue my interest based on what I was seeing, but I have obviously the tools to do so. And from the very beginning, I made a choice that I would be one of the few lawyers who would not be retained by the Port Authority. I would imagine that every lawyer, particularly some of those who will be representing the same man here, would have one time been retained by the Port Authority.
Mm.
You have to make choices. And I can't be responsible for being anything more than a citizen, which I am. As I indicated earlier when I was coming on the show, I don't like having this role of sometimes pretending to be some public intellectual. I'm not. I have a view. If you ask me for it, I will tell you what it's all about. But in doing so, you also create enemies, because this show is not being watched simply by locals or listening to. There are others here who are quite aware of who I am, because I've often had to do battle against them. And so far, it's successful. But to what end? At the end of the day, you're being sabotaged by other people who know that when the bell rings, they must show up. And
Sad commentary about where we are as a country. I want to read a comment, and then we have to take a quick break. This comment is coming in from C. Allen Johnson. It says the Bahamas,
I am also not someone who
the Bahamas government, past and present, including Grand Bahama Port Authority, lacks leadership with the ability to comprehend the relevance of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement in a 21st century global economic environment. And he continues, and then we have to take a break. We need to have an honest conversation on the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, past, present, and future, in proper context of what it was, what it is represented to be, and what it will become. Thanks, Mr. Maurice Glinton KC, for an honest perspective. We have to take a break. On the other side of the break, we only have a few minutes left. Let's talk about the way forward, particularly as it relates to the business community in Grand Bahama. Stay with us. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Global Paradigm Shift will return after this.
At Lee Air, safety is our #1 priority. Flying since 1996, we offer scheduled flights into Fresh Creek and Mangrove Key Andros and Great Harbor Key, Berry Island, twice daily, 7 days a week. Affordable charter services are also available to anywhere in the Bahamas and the Caribbean. Lee Air Charter Services. Call 225-3267, 702-7127, or 322-1317 for reservations.
Understanding your microbiome, also known as your gut ecosystem, can change everything you thought you knew about nutrition, digestion, immunity, and metabolism. Keeping your gut ecosystem healthy and balanced is essential. Ultimate Microbiome by Longevity was specifically formulated to optimize this ecosystem. It provides the advanced support your gut needs through prebiotic, probiotic, and postbiotic supplementation. Our unique blend of probiotics includes Lactobacillus and Plantarum, healthy bacteria that can help prevent harmful bacteria from taking over your gut. Increasing your gut's population of beneficial bacteria creates a more balanced gut microbiome, which has been shown to aid in weight loss, skin health, sleep, mood, and may even help with seasonal allergies. Ultimate Microbiome also promotes the production of postbiotics. Postbiotics are key to help regulate your gastrointestinal health. To enhance digestion, Digizyme Multi-Enzyme Complex, a blend of 5 specific enzymes, has been added to Ultimate Microbiome. It can help break down food so your body can better absorb nutrients. Plus, we've added our proprietary I-26 Hyperimmune Egg Powder to aid in the elimination of disease-causing gut bacteria and help your body balance its immune response. Ultimate Microbiome, the scientific, proprietary, and holistic approach to gut health that helps optimize your body's entire gut ecosystem. To learn more, contact your Longevity associate.
For all your building needs, it's Carib Construction and Project Management on Gladstone Road. We build it all: schools, homes, hotels, and more, including structures requiring a Phase 3 electrical contractor. We also provide project management services. The first step towards your dream building begins at Carib Construction and Project Management. Call us at 376-1556 or 341-4466.
One of the things I love about the mailboat is their relationship with Bahamas Air. I can earn travel points on my international freight and redeem them when I fly.
For me, online shopping is easy, with mailboat to U.S. addresses and regular freight delivery to Nassau. Plus, I can always prepay customs and freight, and they always notify me when my package arrives.
Yeah, a lot of people think the mailboat is just for shipping, but they also offer a safe and secure storage facility at affordable rates, all in a central, convenient location.
We also offer passenger service into Freeport multiple times per week with a seating capacity of over 450 persons. With family movies on large screens, one hot meal included, and on-board lounge for snacks and soft drinks. We're the mailboat. We're bridging people, products, and places.
Executive Printers is your one-stop shop for all your branding and customization needs. Letterheads, envelopes, business cards, invoices, share and gift certificates, rubber stamps, vouchers, funeral programs, brochures, flyers, banners, and promotional items like mugs, water bottles, mouse pads, and key rings, all with personable service and great quality. No project is too small or too large. For great turnaround and competitive pricing, make an executive decision. Call us at 393-5011.
President of the Grand Bahama Chamber of Commerce, James Carey, weighing in, saying that it's been long overdue for the government to take a look at the Hawksbill Creek Agreement.
And in recent times, I have been advocating that the Hawksbill Creek Agreement be revisited and reconfirmed or tweaked as necessary, because at the time the Hawksbill Creek Agreement was put into effect, the world has changed dramatically since that time. And the question remains, is everything therein relevant?
And as for the GBPA,
to believe that there's more that can be done. I have been asking for, and I really would love to see more openness, more transparency coming out of the Port Authority. I would very much like to see engagement, and I think it's important for government to engage with the Port Authority and the community, for my purposes, the business community, but the community at large.
Okay, so that was the president of the Grand Bahama Chamber of Commerce. We only have 2 minutes left on the show, Mr. Glinton. So your final thoughts, particularly as it relates to the way forward, because as we all know, every economy, the engine of which is the small business, and small businesses in Grand Bahama are truly hurting right now. What are your thoughts on the way forward?
Yeah, that's going to be so for some time. But here's what I say. The agreement from the very beginning envisioned a constant review, periodically, I should say. That is, either at the request of the port or at the request of government, with a view to making sure that the purpose, the original purpose for which the agreement was to serve, does not itself be outdated. But we cannot also disregard the fact that you have here a continuation of a process that I think now has fallen into a rut. And there's nothing, as I said, there's nothing wrong with the agreement, but someone must operate this agreement. Someone must operate the ship of state, and it must be the captain who understands navigation. You know, I don't want to be much more blunt than that, but you can't have people who, by virtue of just having a surname, Hayward or St. George, assume that somehow they have this natural talent and ability other than to spend money.
That's
they have to create money and to create a livelihood. Not that the people in the Bahamas ought to be the concern of the principals of the Port Authority. They should, in fact, be trying to increase themselves. That is, but not at the expense of the people. The government has a responsibility for making sure that this stays in place. But you're not going to do it by having people in Parliament who have never even read the Hawksbill Creek Agreement.
My word.
It's a 2-volume set that can be gotten of the commission and the recommendations made 52 years ago. Obviously, the government has never pursued them, and they have no intention of doing so now. But in time, you will see something else come about, and you'll say, now I know what this little skirmish was all about. That's
Mr.
what I
Glinton,
believe.
we are out of time. This has been certainly a pleasure and a learning experience for me in terms of helping to better understand what's been going on in Grand Bahama, and I'm hopeful that it was the same for others out there who may not have been quite aware. And I do hope that this is not the last time that you will make an appearance on GPS. Now that I've finally gotten you on, hopefully you'll be able to come on at another time and help us to continue to break down this triangle.
And we'll talk about other things.
Yes, particularly the way forward. Thank you so much for being here today. I really do appreciate it, but we got to get off the air.
You're welcome.
All right. Michelle Malcolm here. Thank you, Mr. Maurice Glinton. Tomorrow is going to be a TGIF show. However, I'm not going to be sitting in the seat. Professor Sidney MacArthur Walter Thompson is going to be sitting in for me as I have some other plans for tomorrow. Please be sure to support him. Give him a call. Talk about the week that was. And so I will see you guys next week. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Global 99.5 FM reminds our listeners that the views and opinions expressed on this show are those of the host and guest.